The rain was falling over River Run. The night the raven arrived. The blackbird bore a seal. No one in the north expected a golden sun over a red field. It was the symbol of dawn, and the letter inside was addressed to King Robb Stark, the young wolf. Robb sat in the war tent, surrounded by his closest men, Catelyn, Grey Wind growling low at the sound of thunder, Lord Bolton and Great John Umber. He broke the seal, brow furrowed. His mother watched closely. "What is it?" she asked, a tinge of hope in her voice. Robb read the letter twice, slowly, then again faster, his eyes narrowing. Finally he looked up. "It's from Prince Doran Martell of Dorne," he said. "He offers an alliance." The room grew silent. "Dorne," Lord Umber muttered. "That sun-baked kingdom has stayed out of this war. Why now?" Robb handed the letter to Catelyn. She read carefully, lips moving silently. Prince Doran offered troops, gold, and something more, a marriage alliance. His niece, Lady Nemella Sand, though a bastard, was beautiful, clever, and of noble blood. In return, Robb would marry her and gain the southern desert's strength. Catelyn looked at her son. "If this is real, this could change everything. You wouldn't need the Freys, you wouldn't need the trees, you wouldn't need the twins." Robb's jaw tightened. He had already broken his promise to Walder Frey by marrying Talisa, and that betrayal hung over his head like a sword. The Red Wedding hadn't happened yet, but the tension was growing. Walder Frey had invited Robb to his castle for Edmure's wedding, but there was something off about the whole thing. This letter from Dorne felt like a sign. "Send a raven," Robb said finally. "Tell Prince Doran we accept, but ask for proof. Men, gold, something real. I won't ride into a trap chasing rumors." But Prince Doran was no fool. Within weeks, 3,000 Dornish spearmen marched north under the command of Ser Quentyn Martell, his quiet and cautious son. They brought gold, supplies, and the promise. Dorne had seen the Lannisters' cruelty and knew vengeance. After what happened to Elia Martell, Doran had waited, but Robb Stark had honor, and that's what Dorne needed now. The arrival of Dornish troops changed everything. Walder Frey grew uneasy. His plan with Tywin Lannister was already in motion, but now Robb was protected. His army swelled again. Even worse, Oberyn Martell had arrived with his sand snakes, and they made the Freys nervous. No one wanted to make enemies of both the Starks and the Martells. At the camp, Oberyn approached Robb one evening. "You don't know me, King in the North," he said, circling Grey Wind without fear. "But I knew your uncle, Brandon Stark, and I know the Lannisters. You want to destroy them. Good, so do we." Robb didn't trust Oberyn, but he respected his fire. "Why now?" Robb asked. "Why help me?" Oberyn's eyes glinted. "Because Tywin Lannister butchered my sister and her children, and because your war has fire in it. Fire attracts dragons." Robb frowned. "Dragons?" But Oberyn only smiled and walked away. Catelyn noticed something else. The Dornish didn't just bring soldiers, they brought spies. Dorne had contacts in King's Landing, and they passed along a whisper. Walder Frey's wedding was no celebration. The phrase was simple but chilling. The musicians won't stop playing. Catelyn's heart froze when she heard it. She told Robb everything. Together, they cancelled the march to the Twins. Instead, Robb sent a gift and apology to Walder Frey and declared a new wedding. His cousin, Roslyn, would marry a Martell knight, sealing both peace and insult at the same time. The Freys were furious but cautious. They dared not defy both North and Dorne openly. Robb's army turned south instead. The Dornish marched beside the direwolves. The trap of the Red Wedding never sprang. But across the land, Tywin Lannister seethed. He had lost control of the game, and now the pieces were moving on their own. The raven reached King's Landing under moonlight, its black wings cutting through the night like a blade. When the scroll reached Lord Tywin Lannister, his hand trembled slightly just for a second. He rarely showed emotion, but this letter carried more than words. It carried a warning. Robb Stark had allied with Dorne. "Impossible," said Cersei, reading over his shoulder. "The Martells, they hate everyone. They hate us more than they hate the Starks," Tywin said coldly. "And I underestimated Doran Martell. That won't happen again." He rose from his chair and stared into the fire. The Red Wedding was meant to end this war. A quick, silent slaughter, but now the wolf has grown teeth again, and worse, the snake is wrapped around his neck. Cersei poured herself a drink. "We can still act. The Freys can be pushed to fight." Tywin shook his head. "Walder Frey is many things, but he is not brave. He'll not raise arms against Robb now, not with Dorne beside him. No, we need another way." In the shadows, Varys listened, and Varys smiled. Far to the west, Robb Stark rode with his army, the banners of the north, and Dorne flapping in the wind. Beside him rode Sir Quentyn Martell, stoic and unreadable, and not far behind, Oberyn, laughing and spinning his spear on horseback as if he were going to a feast, not a war. Robb couldn't ignore the change in the air. His men walked taller now. Hope, once dimmed after the losses in the Riverlands, had returned. Talisa still rode beside him, alive and smiling, and Grey Wind still prowled the edges of the camp at night like a living omen. But Robb knew better than to trust peace. It never lasted. That night, by the fire, Oberyn finally spoke of something that had lingered unspoken for days. "You think Tywin will do nothing now?" he asked Robb, staring into the flames. "I think he's already planning something worse," Robb replied. Oberyn nodded. "Good. Then you're not as young as they say." Catelyn joined them, her face hard as iron. "He'll strike somewhere soft. Not against swords, against people, families." Oberyn leaned back, tossing a roasted fig into his mouth. "Then let's strike first." The idea took root. With Dorne's spies, they learned of a hidden gold shipment headed for the Westerlands, meant to pay Lannister bannermen. Robb sent a small, fast force led by Lord Karstark and Martell riders. They ambushed the caravan, burning the gold and hanging the guards with signs that read, "The North remembers. Dorne does not forgive." The message was clear. War wasn't just returning, it had evolved. Robb also began forging alliances with houses burned by the Lannisters, Tarly, Hightower, even whispers reaching Old Town and beyond. The world was watching, and with the Red Wedding avoided, the story of the honorable Wolf King who outwitted Tywin Lannister was spreading. But not all was smooth within. At night, Catelyn still had doubts. "You married Talisa without thinking. You risked the Frey's anger. What makes you sure Dorne won't turn?" Robb looked at her. "Because Doran Martell is cautious, and Oberyn, he wants blood. But he wants it spilled in the open, not under a guest's roof." That night, a Dornish scout returned breathless. He had seen something on the road near Harrenhal. Men, thousands, marching under a lion banner, led by Sir Gregor Clegane. The mountain. Robb stood still for a moment. Then he turned to his captains. "Tell the men to prepare." Oberyn didn't move. His eyes burned like fire. "I want the mountain," he whispered. "He took my sister, my niece, my nephew. I want him." Robb placed a hand on his shoulder. "If we win this battle," Robb said, "he's yours." The war had changed. No longer about rebellion or pride. Now it was about vengeance, survival, legacy. And Robb Stark, with Dorne behind him, was no longer just the young wolf. He was the storm at the gates of Lannister power. The battlefield lay just east of Harrenhal, where the scorched earth smelled of death and burnt wood. Smoke curled into the sky like black vines, and the ground trembled with the marching of armored boots. On one side, the banners of House Stark and House Martell fluttered defiantly in the wind, the direwolf and the sun and spear, standing side by side for the first time in the war. On the other side, the Lion of Lannister prowled across crimson banners, carried by men who feared nothing because they followed a beast, Sir Gregor Clegane, the Mountain. Robb Stark stood atop a small hill overlooking the field. Oberyn Martell stood beside him, his dark eyes locked on the massive figure in Lannister armor far below. "That's him," Oberyn said quietly, "the man who crushed my sister's skull and laughed while her children screamed." Robb looked at Oberyn and nodded once. "Then we stop him today." Oberyn didn't reply. He turned and walked toward his own men, the Dornish spearmen, lean and deadly in their desert armor. They didn't wear heavy plates like the Northerners. They relied on speed, precision, and cruelty. Robb addressed his commanders next. "We strike from both flanks. The Mountain expects brute force, but we'll give him something else. Let the Sand Snakes harass the rear, lure him in. When he commits, we close the jaws." The trap was set. By midday the battle had begun. Horns sounded across the field as Dornish riders clashed with Lannister scouts. Arrows rained from both sides, and the cries of war filled the sky. Robb led the left flank, charging with Greatjon Umber and the Northmen. On the right, Sir Quentine Martell commanded his father's troops with quiet discipline. But in the center, riding like a demon through fire and blood, came Sir Gregor Clegane. The Mountain smashed through shield walls like they were made of parchment. Men died screaming, their bones shattered by his brutal swings. Even Dornish spears bent against his armor. Oberyn watched from a distance, eyes narrowed. "He wants chaos," he muttered. "Let's give him a taste." With a signal, the Sand Snakes, Oberyn's deadly daughters, descended into the field. Nimble, fierce, and skilled with poison-tipped weapons, they danced between Lannister lines, cutting down supply runners and burning wagons. They didn't fight the Mountain directly, not yet, but they cut off his support, bleeding his army from the edges. Robb saw the opportunity. "Now!" he shouted. The Northerners and Dornish converged, crashing into the Lannister center from both sides. It was like watching jaws close around prey. The Mountain, surrounded, roared like an animal and kept swinging. He cut down 5 men in one charge. But then he saw him. Oberyn Martell, walking toward him slowly, no armor, only his red and gold leathers and a long, slender spear tipped with dark venom. "You remember me," Oberyn said, circling. "You raped her, you murdered her, you killed her children." The Mountain growled and charged. The duel was chaos and art blended into one. Oberyn danced around Gregor like a flame, stabbing, slicing, moving before each strike landed. His spear struck Clegane's thigh, then his shoulder, drawing blood. Robb couldn't look away. Gregor staggered. The poison had entered his veins. Oberyn smiled, but too soon. With a sudden, vicious roar, the Mountain lunged, grabbing Oberyn by the leg. He slammed him to the ground, raising a massive gauntlet to crush his skull. Robb didn't think he acted. Greywind leapt into the fray, fangs bared, crashing into the Mountain's chest. At the same time, Robb plunged his sword through Gregor's back, steel sinking deep. With a howl, the Mountain fell forward, finally defeated, his massive frame crumpling under wolf and man. Silence fell across the field. Oberyn lay in the dirt, blood on his face but alive. He looked at Robb and laughed weakly. Now that was satisfying. Robb extended a hand and helped him up. "You should have finished him quicker. I was savoring it," Oberyn muttered, wincing. The battle was won. Thousands lay dead, but the Lannister army had broken, and their monster was slain. The lion had lost its teeth, and now the North and Dorne stood united, not just in arms, but in vengeance. But in the shadows of King's Landing, a new player watched the flames rising in the distance, and whispered to herself, "Dragons always return to fire." Far across the narrow sea in the city of Meereen, Daenerys Targaryen stood at the balcony of her pyramid, her silver hair flowing in the wind. Below her, freedmen were cheering her name, but her thoughts weren't with them tonight. They were with Westeros, the land that had stolen her birthright. A raven had come earlier that day. It bore a message from a merchant spy loyal to Varys. It spoke of battles and blood. The young wolf, Robb Stark, still lived. The Red Wedding had never happened. Instead, he had allied with Dorne, and together they had just crushed Sir Gregor Clegane on the fields near Harrenhal. Daenerys's eyes narrowed as she read. "They say he fights with honor," said Ser Jorah Mormont, who stood beside her, "that he refused to slaughter prisoners, that he spared women and children, that he killed the mountain himself." Daenerys remained quiet, but her jaw tightened. He's winning hearts. And if the North, the Riverlands, and Dorne stand behind him, they'll name him king before you ever set foot on Westerosi soil, Jorah added. She turned slowly to face him. "Then let them name him, but I am the last Targaryen. The Iron Throne is mine." Jorah hesitated. "Perhaps not the last." She tilted her head. "What are you saying?" He looked away. "Only that. The people do not care for bloodlines. They care for justice, for strength, for a leader who will not abandon them." His words stung more than he realized. That night, as the moon rose over Meereen, Daenerys sat alone with her dragons. Drogon, now the size of a warhorse, growled low in the dark, sensing her unease. "Is it him they want?" she whispered to no one. "Robb Stark, the boy who wouldn't die?" Back in Westeros, Robb stood over a map in his war tent, the heat of battle still clinging to his skin. He had won a great victory, but he knew what came next. King's Landing. "We have the numbers," said Greatjon Ovember, his voice gruff. "They'll never see it coming." Robb shook his head. "They'll never see it coming." Robb shook his head. "They'll see. Tywin Lannister always sees. We move fast, we move smart. We don't go straight to the gates, we squeeze him. We make the people question him." Oberyn Martell, still bandaged but walking strong, chuckled. "You want to fight a war of whispers? That's my brother's game." Doran was always the patient one. Catelyn spoke up. "We don't need patience. We need pressure. Gold is the lifeblood of the Lannisters. Cut off their veins." And so they did. Over the next weeks, Dornish saboteurs and northern raiders hit Lannister supply lines, burned down tax routes, and stirred rebellion in small towns. House Tyrell, uneasy with the chaos, withdrew support temporarily, and whispers began to rise in King's Landing. Why hasn't the king done anything? Joffrey, mad with fury and paranoia, ordered public executions to show strength, but it only exposed his instability. Meanwhile, Tywin grew more desperate. For the first time in decades, the lion was cornered. Then came the news Tywin dreaded most. The Vale had joined Robb Stark. Lady Lysa Arryn, swayed by Catelyn and cautious promises of protection, agreed to send men. Littlefinger, who had once hoped to manipulate the chaos, realized the game was slipping from his fingers. In the north, House Manderly raised its banners, declaring Robb the true king of Westeros, not just of the north. One by one, the dominoes fell. In the Red Keep, Varys whispered to Tyrion, "It appears the wolves and the snakes are swallowing the lion whole, and somewhere across the sea, the dragon watches." Tyrion poured himself another drink. "Then perhaps we need a wolf of our own." Far to the north, Jon Snow stood on the wall, eyes gazing out over endless snow. A raven landed beside him. He untied the scroll. It bore Robb's seal. "I need you, brother. I need the strength of the Watch, the blood of the North. The time has come." Jon lowered the parchment, his breath misting in the cold air. He looked south. if the world was changing, he couldn't stay behind. Snowflakes drifted from the sky like slow-falling ash as Jon Snow stood atop the wall, the wind howling through Castle Black. The letter from Robb weighed heavy in his hand, though its words were brief. "You are my brother, always. The North needs you. The realm needs you. Come." Jon had read it 10 times. By the 11th, his heart was burning. He had taken vows to the Night's Watch, to guard the realms of men. But now the realm was in flames, and it was his family holding the line. "You're thinking about breaking your vows," said Samwell Tarly, stepping beside him. Jon didn't deny it. "Robb's alive. He has Dorne, the Vale. He has Dorne, the Vale. He could take King's Landing." Sam hesitated. "Then what? You'll fight in another war?" "Trade one war for another. I'll fight for my family," Jon replied, his voice low. "The Watch is crumbling. Half of our brothers are dead. And the White Walkers, they're real. But the realm doesn't listen. Not unless someone speaks from a throne." Sam said nothing. That night, Jon met with Maester Aemon, whose milky eyes stared into nothing and everything. "You want to leave," Aemon said before Jon spoke. "I want to help," Jon said. "Robb could unite the kingdom. He could save it. But he's fighting alone." Maester Aemon's voice was soft. "A Targaryen alone in the world is a terrible thing. But a Stark surrounded by enemies is worse." Jon knelt. "Then release me from my vows." A long silence. Then Aemon whispered, "The Watch needs your honesty more than your obedience. Go. But remember, there is always a price for breaking oaths." Jon rode south that night, Ghost padding silently at his side. In King's Landing, Tywin Lannister sat alone in the small council chamber, a decanter of wine untouched before him. He had ruled this kingdom in everything but name for years, but now he was losing. Dorne had sided with the Starks. The Vale had opened its gates. The Freys were useless, and the Boltons had gone silent. Only the Reach remained, and even they were shifting. He looked at the council table, now nearly empty. Littlefinger was gone. Varys kept disappearing. Pycelle babbled nonsense. Only Tyrion remained, watching his father with eyes that gleamed with quiet anger. "You underestimated him," Tyrion said. "Robb Stark is a boy," Tywin muttered. "No," Tyrion replied. "He was a boy. Now he's a king. And unlike Joffrey, people like him." Tywin's jaw clenched. At that moment, Cersei stormed into the room, her gown disheveled, her eyes wide with fury. "They're saying it in the streets now," she hissed. "The Wolf King is coming. The people chant it. The guards whisper it. Even the gold cloaks are questioning their loyalty." Tywin stood slowly. "Then we must remind the people why they fear the lion." But outside the capital, fear was failing. Robb's forces had captured Harrenhal, and with it, a Lannister stronghold was broken. Arya Stark, freed from captivity by a band of northern scouts, arrived at Robb's camp one night with dirt on her face and a dagger hidden in her sleeve. The moment Robb saw her, he dropped to his knees and embraced her. She didn't cry, neither did he, but for a long time they didn't let go. "I wanted to kill them all," Arya whispered. "I still do." Robb brushed a leaf from her tangled hair. "You'll get your chance." Together they began planning the final march. Far away in Meereen, Daenerys stood before a fire, her dragons circling above. She had received word of Jon Snow's departure from the Wall and Robb Stark's gathering power. She turned to Missandei. "They say he fights with a direwolf at his side, that his army sings of honor. They say he fights like a dragon," Missandei replied softly. Daenerys frowned. "Then perhaps the dragon and the wolf should not be enemies." On the shores of Westeros, Jon Snow arrived at Robb's camp, cloaked in black, Ghost silent beside him. The soldiers stared in awe, unsure if he was ghost or man. When Robb saw him, he laughed, the first time in weeks, and ran to embrace him. "You Cain," Robb said. "You cold," Jon replied. Their hug was tight, brother to brother, not of blood, but of bond. Catelyn watched from afar, troubled but silent. Jon Snow was still a bastard, still the shadow of another woman. But he was here, and Westeros was changing fast. The final march would begin soon. The wolves were no longer scattered. Now they hunted as a pack. The drums of war echoed across the King's Road as thousands marched south. Stark banners whipped through the wind, flanked by Dornish sun spears, Arryn falcons, and scattered sigils of houses long thought broken. It was the largest united force Westeros had seen since Robert's rebellion. But this time, the rebellion was against the Lion. At the head of the army rode Robb Stark, armored in black and grey, his direwolf cloak draped across his shoulders. Beside him rode Jon Snow, Ghost stalking just behind. On his other flank, Oberyn Martell, recovered from his wounds, grinned with a predator's joy. "They think we'll strike the gates," Oberyn said, eyeing the horizon. Robb nodded. "Let them think. We're not here to knock, we're here to burn the hinges off." Meanwhile, within King's Landing, the city was unraveling. Fear festered in every alley and inn. Bread lines stretched for miles. The price of flour had tripled. The gold cloaks were growing restless, many of them Riverland men with northern blood torn between coin and kin. In the Red Keep, Cersei was nearly mad with rage. She had struck 2 servants just that morning. The whispers in the court were getting louder. The North is coming. The young king lives. The lions are cornered. Even Joffrey could sense it, pacing like a caged dog. "Why did we kill them all?" He screamed at the council. "I want their heads. Put them on spikes." Tyrion, seated quietly, sipped his wine. "Heads are only useful if they're still listening, dear nephew." "Spare us the riddles," Cersei snapped. Tywin sat silently, eyes closed, thinking. Finally he spoke. "We still have wildfire." Tyrion's head snapped up. "No, you're not doing that again." "We may have no choice," Tywin said coldly. "If the city must burn to keep it, so be it." But the walls themselves were no longer trustworthy. Tyrion had heard whispers. Half the gold cloaks had begun meeting in secret, swearing oaths to a different king. Not Joffrey, not Tommen, but Robb Stark. Outside the city, the siege began in silence. Robb ordered no horns, no show of glory, only strategy. The Vale's knights took the eastern hills, cutting off supply lines. The Dornish secured the southern roads, while the north set up siege engines on the western approach. No one left, no one entered. But it wasn't just steel that surrounded King's Landing, it was fire. Oberyn Martell's spies lit warehouses ablaze in the night. The grain stores in Flea Bottom exploded into flames, and the people turned on each other. Chaos rippled through the slums as starving mothers screamed for bread and soldiers beat back riots with bloodied batons. From his command tent, Jon Snow watched the glow in the sky. "They'll turn on the Lannisters before we reach the gate," he said. "That's the plan," Robb murmured. "Break the walls from the inside." And inside, it was working. The small folk gathered in the great sept of Baelor, praying not to the gods but to the Wolf King. Stories had spread like wildfire itself. Robb had slain the mountain. He spared prisoners. He gave land to farmers. He walked with a dire wolf at his side. Cersei drank alone in her chambers, muttering, "The people love their fantasy, until it kills them." But Tywin knew it was no fantasy. At dawn, a new raven arrived. It bore a sigil not seen in the capital for years, the Targaryen 3-headed dragon. He read it, hands shaking ever so slightly. "To the Wolf King Robb Stark, the Martell House, and the Lords of the Realm. I am Daenerys Stormborn, rightful heir to the Iron Throne. The war must end, but not through Lannister blood, through fire and justice. I will come, Meet me or be consumed in the storm I bring." Tywin crumpled the letter and threw it in the fire. But it was too late. The dragons were coming, and outside the gates Robb Stark smiled, the sun rising behind him. "Let them choose," he said, "lion, dragon, or wolf." The sound came first a deep, thunderous roar that cracked the sky and turned every face in King's Landing upward. What followed was terror. From the clouds above, a shadow swept over the Red Keep, vast wings blotting out the sun. Screams erupted from the city below as Drogon, the black dragon, descended, followed by Rhaegal and Viserion. They didn't breathe fire, not yet. They circled the capital like vultures watching a dying animal. On the battlements, Cersei Lannister watched with wild eyes. "She's come," she whispered, "the mad girl with her flying monsters." In the streets, the starving people did not flee. They cheered. "Dragon Queen, breaker of chains." The chants began to rise. They had heard tales that she freed slaves, that she killed tyrants, that she burned her enemies, but only after giving them a choice. And now she was here. Beyond the city walls, Robb Stark stood beside Jon Snow, watching the dragons spiral over the Red Keep. Beside them, Oberyn Martell raised an eyebrow, impressed despite himself. "She knows how to make an entrance," he said. Jon's face was unreadable. "If she lands in the city first, she'll claim it." Robb nodded. "Then we meet her before she does." He mounted his horse and ordered the banners to hold. No storming the gates. Not yet, not with dragons overhead. Daenerys landed her dragons just south of the city, beyond the siege lines where the Riverlands met the Crownlands. Her army was already there, unsullied, Dothraki freedmen from across the sea, hardened and disciplined. She rode forward, flanked by Missandei and Grey Worm, her eyes sharp as blades. Robb and Jon arrived under a white flag, escorted only by a few guards and Ghost, who growled low at the sight of Drogon. For a long moment, no one spoke. The two leaders simply stared. Finally, Daenerys said, "You're younger than I expected." Robb smirked. "So are you." Jon stepped forward. "You both come too far to fight each other now." Daenerys turned to him, her eyes softened. "You must be the one they call Snow. I'm Jon. You left the Wall, broke your vows. I left to stop a war that will kill us all." Daenerys studied him for a long moment. "And what do you want now?" Jon looked between them. Unity, peace, real peace, not built on fear or fire. Robb added, "The North has bled. The Riverlands are ash. The people don't care who sits the throne. They care who feeds them, who defends them. You say you want to break the wheel, then help us crush what's left of it." Daenerys looked over the siege lines. The city was crumbling without a single sword drawn. The people were ready to rebel, and within the Red Keep, the Lannisters were ready to burn it all. She nodded. "We attack together." "But no fire," Robb said sharply. "We take the city with swords. No children die." Daenerys narrowed her eyes. "And if Cersei uses wildfire," Jon answered, "then let the fire be hers. We'll use steel." They made a pact. Inside the Red Keep, Tyrion Lannister watched the alliances forming. He had expected betrayal, power grabs, greed. Instead, he saw something more dangerous on her. He approached his father's chambers. "You have two choices," Tyrion said. "Open the gates, or let your golden city burn." Tywin didn't even look up. "I built this kingdom," Tyrion nodded. "And now your children are tearing it down." Cersei had gone silent. Locked in her chambers with wildfire hidden beneath the keep, she clutched Tommen, her last child, whispering madness in his ears. That night, Varys returned to Tyrion with grim news. "The pyromancers have been summoned. The queen means to light the city if we lose." Tyrion downed his wine. "Then we must not lose." At dawn, the allied armies marched. Dothraki riders thundered across the fields, flanking the gold cloaks who had quietly changed sides. Unsullied units moved with precision, securing the gates. Northern archers and Dornish spearmen poured in behind them. There was no great battle. There was only surrender. The gates were opened from within. The people flooded the streets, dragging down lion banners, burning them in the squares. When Tywin tried to flee, he was caught by his own guards, paid in full by Littlefinger days ago. But it was Cersei who was the last danger. In her chamber, torch in hand, she stood above barrels of wildfire. "Come any closer and I end us all," she screamed. Daenerys stepped in, calm. "You won't. You care too much about your son." Cersei's hand trembled, but she didn't drop the torch until Tommen cried out, "Mother, please!" That broke her. The torch clattered to the stone. The war was over. The Red Keep's throne room echoed with silence. And there stood the Iron Throne, cold, sharp, cursed. "You still want it?" Robb looked at the sword-forged seat, then at Jon. "No, let the realm decide." Daenerys smiled, but in the crowd, Littlefinger watched with a flicker of amusement. The war had ended, but the game was far from over. The Iron Throne stood before them, towering and twisted, forged from 1,000 swords of fallen enemies. It had ruled Westeros not with peace, but with pain. And now, after all the bloodshed, betrayal and burning, it stood unclaimed. Robb Stark stepped back from it, his eyes unreadable. The hall was filled with lords and soldiers, but a silence hung like a blade in the air. Every breath held the same question: who would sit the throne now? Daenerys Targaryen stood nearest to it, her silver hair glowing in the morning light that streamed through the shattered windows of the Red Keep. Drogon waited outside, his shadow crossing the floor. "I came to take back what was stolen from my family," she said softly, her voice echoing in the vast hall. "And I have done it." But then she turned to Robb. "Yet I cannot rule alone. The realm is broken. It needs more than dragons and bloodlines. It needs unity." Whispers rippled through the crowd. Jon Snow stepped forward. "Then let us build a new Westeros, together." There was a pause, heavy and uncertain, and then, slowly, Lord Davos Seaworth, once a smuggler, now a respected voice among the army, spoke. "Maybe it's time we stopped choosing kings from birth and started choosing them for the realm." It was dangerous talk, but no one shouted him down. Even Tyrion, bruised and weary, nodded. "Perhaps we need something different. A council, a circle of lords and leaders. The North, the South, the East, the West, all voices heard." Robb looked to his mother, Catelyn, who had watched all this unfold with careful eyes. She gave a single nod, and so the talks began. Days passed. In the courtyard of the Red Keep, northern soldiers repaired walls while Dornish scouts stood watch. Oberyn Martell moved through the halls with wine in one hand and a sharp eye on every whisper. He knew peace was just another kind of war. Sansa Stark arrived from the Vale, cloaked in blue and white, bringing with her lords who had once stayed neutral. She kissed her brother's cheek and took Arya's hand, her face hard but proud. Jon watched all of it and remained silent. That night, Daenerys found him walking the garden paths once tended by madness. "You fought to save the realm," she said. "So did you," Jon replied. She studied him. "You're not like your brothers." "I'm not sure who my brothers are anymore," he said with a quiet laugh. Daenerys stepped closer. "You don't want the throne, but the people love you. You speak plainly. You fight for them." "I don't want their love," Jon said. "I want their future." She smiled. "Then help me give it to them." The next morning, the leaders gathered in the throne room, not to crown a monarch, but to form the first great council of Westeros. 12 seats were placed in a circle. Robb Stark took one, representing the north. Daenerys sat for the Crown Lands and the Stormlands, Oberyn Martell for Dorne, Sansa for the Vale. Tyrion represented the Westerlands, his father dead and legacy in ashes. Yara Greyjoy for the Iron Islands. Davos Seaworth for the Reach after House Tyrell had collapsed into chaos. The others were filled with new blood-lesser lords, respected knights, and voices of the people. Not all were noble by birth. Some were chosen for wisdom, for loyalty, or for having simply survived. A new system was born, not democracy, but a balance. And as the council ruled, Jon Snow disappeared. He returned to the north, beyond the wall, where snow never stopped falling and ghosts still roamed. He rode with the free folk, a brother of no crown, no title, no chains. He had given everything and asked for nothing. Some said he was running from glory. Others said he was guarding the last secret of Westeros. Only Ghost ever knew the truth. Daenerys ruled not from the Iron Throne, but from a new seat in Dragonstone, closer to the sea and the people. The Iron Throne itself was melted by Drogon's fire, its remains scattered into the sea. Robb Stark returned to Winterfell, not as a king, but as Warden of the North, guiding his people with fewer words and more wisdom. He married a Martell, sealing the bond of fire and ice. Arya sailed west, seeking the edge of the world. Cersei was imprisoned, silent and mad, her eyes never leaving the sea, whispering of wildfire and children who never came home. Peace returned to the realm, but it was not soft. It had scars, ashes, and ghosts. And though no one wore a crown, the realm had never been stronger.